Now we take a look at Chapter 13, Designing Organizational Structures. The learning objective for this chapter is to describe three types of coordination in organizational structures, discuss the role and effects of span of control, centralization, and formalization, and relate these elements to organic and mechanistic organizational structures. Number three, identify and evaluate six types of departmentalization. Explain how the external environment, organizational size, technology, and strategy are relevant when designing an organizational structure. Consider, if you will, Samsung Electronics emerging organizational structure. Well, Samsung Electronics is relying on a less hierarchical and more centralized organizational structure to improve employee creativity, adaptability, and competitiveness. They're trying to be more like a startup business, bottom-up decision making rather than more a top-down decision making. They have a flatter hierarchy, 4 career levels versus 7 in the previous model. They have more upward communication styles and involvement. There's less formalization. Employees communicate informally with coworkers elsewhere in the firm. They have an increased sense of creativity. Employees second to creative lab to develop new ideas without formal structure constraints. Now, I guess then a basic definition for organizational structure is the division of labor and patterns of coordination, communication, workflow, and formal power that direct organizational activities. Is more than just an organizational chart. It's related to job design, the notion of team dynamics, power, and relationships as well. And so, ESA, as I will note now, the European Space Agency, satellite design through concurrent engineering. It coordinates satellite design and missions partly through informal communication. It sort of forms temporary cross-disciplinary concurrent engineering teams whose members work together in ESA's concurrent design facility in the Netherlands. Now, the typical team consists of 2 or 3 dozen people from propulsion, flight dynamics, thermal control, and etc. They meet for 4 hours twice each week. As a result, there's better coordination, less over the fence, yelling at each other kinds of interaction. ESA's concurrent engineer design facility founder says this: with all disciplines coordinating the same time and space, we tackle problems from all points of view to turn a naturally consequential process into something that is more concurrent. Let's talk about this notion then of division of labor. Division of labor sort of results in what's known as job specialization, whereby work is subdivided into separate jobs and assigned to different people. It improves efficiency and master tasks faster as a result of this. There's less changeover and loss of time. There's a lower training cost and easier person-job matching. Also, in this notion of division of labor is the need to coordinate work, or the coordination of work. There's this value of dividing labor is limited to the ability to coordinate that work. Coordinating work can be costly, which also limits this notion of work division. Now, every organization uses one or more of the 3 coordinating mechanisms. Either they're going to use informal communication, a formal hierarchy, or standardization. Coordination through informal communication. All organizations use informal communication to coordinate their work. That is sharing information, forming common mental models, is vital to non-routine and ambiguous situations, and sort of incorporates the sense of media-rich channels. This is easier in small firms, but increasingly possible in large firms due to the notion of technology. Now, larger organizations also apply special forms of informal communication coordination. For instance, they use the role of liaisons, that is, employees who are expected to communicate and share information with coworkers in other work units. They use the integrator role, the employers responsible for coordinating a work process by encouraging others to share information, like brand managers, if you will. There's the temporary teams, cross-sectional project teams from various departments, concurrent engineering teams from different engineering backgrounds or fields coming together to work collaboratively. The other coordinating mechanism, there's the formal hierarchy. There's the direct supervision, the chain of command. There's the notion of assigning formal legitimate power to people who direct work processes and allocated resources. This is necessary in large firms, but has power. As we're thinking about this formal hierarchy, again, direct leadership, assigned formal power, directing of the allocation of resources is necessary in a larger firm, but it has some problems. This hierarchical form of coordinating reduces the firm's agility in complex and novel situations, a little rigid, less flexible, creates the establishment of a costly bureaucracy. It conflicts with the notion of employee autonomy and sort of a participation or involvement model. Another notion consistent with the mechanisms of coordinating our work is standardization, creating routine patterns of behavior or output. There's the standard process, or the standardized processes, job descriptions and procedures that are created. There's the standardization of outputs, clear goals and outputs, like these are the sales that we expect to generate. This is our sales target. Then there's the standardization of skills, the extensive training for precise roles and behavior that's needed as we think about the coordinating of mechanisms. Then there are elements of organization structure. There are 4 basic elements to be exact. There's the span of control, centralization, formalization, and departmentalization. Well, let's look at the notion of span of control. Span of control is the number of people directly reporting to the next level. There is a narrow span of control when few people report directly to a manager. There's a wider span of control that is possible when, 1, you have other coordinating mechanisms that are present. For example, self-directed teams coordinated through informal communications and specialized knowledge, sort of a standardization. A wider span of control is possible when you have routine tasks. It's where you require less direction and advice from supervisors because the task is so routine. A wider span of control is possible when you have low employee interdependence, less interpersonal conflict and clear role responsibilities, so less supervision intervention needed. And then the notion of tall structures versus that of flat structured. The span of control is interconnected with organizational size. That is the number of employees and the number of layers in the organization. So as companies grow, they build a taller hierarchy and or a wider span of control. Well, what's the problem with a tall hierarchy? Well, executives receive low quality and less timely information. Information is filtered and distorted, travels a long way. There's a higher overhead cost because you have more managers per employees. It undermines employee empowerment and engagement. The hierarchy draws power away from your frontline workers. Well, then there's also though some problems that might be associated with the flatter model. One of the problems with the flatter model is you've got fewer managers to translate corporate strategy into your daily operations, less time to effectively coach your employees or to resolve conflict, more difficult to develop managerial skills in this flattened organization, and fewer positions and steps to develop a manager. And the management promotions are riskier in flatter organizations. There are bigger steps in responsibility that one has to jump to. And then there's the notion of centralization versus decentralization. Centralization is the former decision-making authority is held by a small group of people, typically at the top of the organization. Decentralization, decision authority power is dispersed throughout the organization, and firms decentralize as they grow larger and older. Decentralized varies in different parts of the organization. For instance, management and marketing may have one model of centralization versus that of IT. This fulfillment by Amazon was very high formalization due to the standardization of work processes. Scanner displays direct employees to the next task, include time allowed. Computers calculate how many products employees should pick, move, pack, and store per hour. This formalization again in Amazon, the standardizing behavior through rules, procedures, formal training, and mechanisms sort of happen within this Amazon operation. And so it increases at Amazon. Formalization increases with age. More experience enables more standardized practices. Size. Requires standardization to supplement other forms of coordination due to the sheer size. Then there's regulations. External requirements also sometimes might mandate the need for standardization. There are problems with formalization. Well, less organizational flexibility happens because of formalization. So again, in formalization increases with age, with size, and with regulation. But there's less flexibility. Employees follow prescribed behaviors, even when situations might even call for a more flexible or customized response. It undermines creativity. When you have formalization, there's less work efficiency. Work rules become sort of convoluted. It increases job dissatisfaction and workplace stress. Rules and processes and procedures become the focus of attention rather than the needs of various stakeholders within the organization. Then there's this notion of this mechanistic versus organic. Now, this mechanistic versus organic structures. Well, as you think about a mechanistic structure, you have a narrow span of control. More supervision of the staff happens. You have high centralization, that is limited decision making at the lower levels. You have high formalization, that is, many rules and procedures, rigidly defined jobs. Now, when you have more organic structure, however, you have a wide span of control, less supervision, more employees per manager. You have decentralized decision making, more employee autonomy happens within the structure. You have low formalization, few rules and procedure, that is, less coordination through standardized processes and procedures, protocols. It works better when employees have well developed roles and expertise, that is, standardization through skills. Now, a mechanistic structure, however, is better in a stable environment. It's easier there to establish routine behaviors. Um, Organic structures are better when you have a rapidly changing and a dynamic environment. There's more flexibility, and these environments are more responsive to change. Organic structures are better when you have high performance workplaces where emphasize information sharing and employee empowerment, participation, and engagement. When employees have well developed roles and expertise, then this an organic structure might also be preferred. And then there's the notion of departmentalization and simple structure. It specifies how employees and their activities are grouped together, sort of reflective and illustrated in the organizational chart, if you will. There are three functions of departmentalization. Departmentalization establishes a chain of command, supervisor structure. It creates common mental models and measures of performances, gives us kind of a definition and a framework. Departmentalization also encourages staff to coordinate through informal communication. Members typically work near each other. Now, there's simple structure. The employee, they employ only a few people and typically offer only one distinct product or service. There's a minimal hierarchy. Employees usually report to the owner in these kinds of structure. The roles are broadly defined. Insufficient economics of scale for specialized jobs. There's a centralized structure. The owners provide direct supervision to coordinate tasks, and the coordination also happens through informal communication channel, no organization structure walls between the employee. There's a functional structure, or the notion of functional structure, whereby organization or organize employees around specific knowledge or resources. They're typically centralized to coordinate diverse activities. Most firms have kind of a functional structure at some level of the hierarchy or at some time within their history. And how do we think then about evaluating functional structure? Well, the benefits of organization or evaluating your functional structure, the benefits are the economics of scales. You got specialized pools of talent, and you're able to identify when that's needed and who they are. It supports employee identity with the specialization of profession. You're able to specialize within your career, have a career path. And supervision becomes easier because your employees have common issues now, but there is some limitation, though, to this functional structure. It tends to have more emphasis on skills and professional needs than on the company's product, service, or the client's needs. There's higher dysfunctional conflict across the unit and more stress. There's a poor sense of coordination and requires more control. What about divisional structures? Well, as we think about that, it organizes employee around geographic areas, outputs, products, and services or clients. There are different forms of divisional structure. There's the geographic, there's the product, and there's the client. Now, geographical structure, divisional structure organizes employees around a distinct region. The product organizes them around a distinct output. The client organizes them around customer groups. Now, the best type of divisional structure depends on the main environmental diversity, or even, if you believe it or not, uncertainty. For example, product structure is needed if the company sells several different types of product. Geographic structure may be needed if you have clients that are spread across different geographical locations. Geographical divisional structures become less common because you have less need for local representation. Clients can purchase online and communicate with businesses from anywhere. Um, it becomes less common when you have a reduced geographical variation. The customer's preferences are converging around the world, become more globally centered, and more global clients who demand one global point of purpose versus another. How do we then think about evaluating divisional structures? Well, there's some benefits to divisional structures. Building blocks emerge, and with building blocks, you're going to accommodate the sense of growth. It becomes outcome focused and focused on the employee attention on products and customers, and not necessarily on the employee's own skill. But there are limitations as well. You have the duplication of resources, the insufficient use of resources because they are not pooled. There's development of silos of knowledge, expertise sort of isolated within one division versus another. There's a complex environment, makes it difficult to identify the best type of divisional structure. So some firms change structures frequently from regional to product, results in shifting executive power, which produces departures and even sometimes turnover and frustration. Let's then think a little bit about the notion of team-based structures. They're built around self-directed work teams, organized around work processes. Typically, an organic structure, if you will, happens within the team-based structure, whereby you've got a wide span of control. The teams operate with minimal supervision. There's decentralization because the team makes up make their own day-to-day decisions. There's lower formalization because teams use more of a communication and less strict procedural processes. Now, it's usually found within divisional structures, but some firms can completely be team-based structures. You think about companies like Simco or Morningstar or Gore and Associates. How do we then think about evaluating the team-based structures? There's some benefits to the team-based structures. They're responsive and flexible in a turbulent environment. There's lower administrative costs in this team-based structures and less formal hierarchy. There are quicker and informed decision-making happens in a team-based. There are some limitations. Costly interpersonal skill building. In order to have a sense of team, you've got to build a sense of team and spend time doing that. It takes longer to coordinate doing team development compared to coordinating work through formal hierarchization. So it could take longer to coordinate that. Sometimes there's role ambiguity that increases a sense of employee stress within the team model. Team leader issues may result because you have less power, ambiguous roles and careers. Sometimes you have the duplication of resources across teams and end up having some potential competition going on. This is company ABC's graphic product matrix structure. It's a simplified example of how ABC group structure, matrix structure, organized around products with power grids and process automation and regions. Now, the characteristics of a multinational matrix structure is typically geographic on one dimension and product, client or function on several dimensions. One person in each region reports to both company head and head of products. The product and the region head might not have equal power. The matrix sometimes create only For some regions, due to large size and high potential and/or low visibility at the CEO offices, there's a product-based matrix structure. You might find that most employees assigned permanently to a functional unit, engineering, design, marketing, but located temporarily in a specific product unit, like game number 2 or game number 1. Now, how do we then think about evaluating this matrix structure? Well, there's some benefit. It uses resources, expertise effectively. You end up having better communication, some flexibilities and innovation. It focuses employees on serving the client and creating the product, supports knowledge sharing, and solution when you have two divisions deserving equal kind of importance. There's some limitations, however. More conflict among the managers who share power, ambiguous accountability with two different bosses. Employees experience more functional and conflict stress within this model. What about this notion of network structures? Well, the alliance of a firms creating a product service, kind of the network structure, the alliance of a firms creating a product service. The emphasis on core competition is characterized here. Outsource non-core tasks to firms where it is their core competence. You got in this sense as well, more common and changing technology, complex work. But as you think about this and evaluating this, there are benefits and again limitations. You got high flexibility, not saddled with non-essential facilities. You have potentially more efficiency. But there are limitations. There is this exposure to market forces, which ends up having a higher cost risk associated, less control over subcontractors than in the house. What about this notion of external environment and structures? Let's take a look at external environment and structures. Preferring structure depends on the external environment contingencies. So your preferred structure depends on your external environment contingencies. You got the dynamic versus stable environment. Well, if it's a dynamic environment, you're going to have high rate of change, novel situations, lack of identifiable patterns. They use organic structures, that is team-based and network and experienced employees. You got the stable environment as you think about dynamic. They're stable, regular cycles of activity, steady environmental changes, predictable changes. They use more of the mechanistic structure, more efficient, profitable. And then you got complex versus simple. Simple environments, few things to monitor. Complex environment, many elements. Decentralized in complex environment, and you have better decision making that happens within that environment. Well, what about the external environment and structures? Well, you have diverse versus integrated environments. Diverse environments, you have a variety of products, services, clients, and regions, so forth and so on. In the integrated environment, only one client, product, and geographic areas. Diverse environments call for a divisional structure aligned with the diversity, more decentralization, and more adaptable responses. You've got this notion of hostile versus beneficence environment. The hostile environment, the resources are scarce and there's more competition. They tend to be dynamic environments, but they lack predictability. Now, the beneficent environment is plenty of resources and product demand. Hostile environments better with organic structure, more adaptable to change, complexity. Centralization occurs, though, in extreme hostile environments, but could lead to worse decision and too slow decentralization later. But what are the effects of organizational size? As organizations grow, they increase division of labor, which is job specialization. They increase coordination through standardization and formal hierarchy development. They increase decentralization, push decision-making down the hierarchy. Of course, we have to take a look at the notion of technology and structure. Technology refers to mechanism or process by which an organization turns out its products and services. There are two contingencies as you think about it. There's task variability and task analyzability. Task variability is how predictable the job duties are from one day to the next. Low variability occurs when work is highly routine and predictable. They have task analyzability, which means how much the job can be performed using known procedures and rules. High task analyzability when employees have well-defined guidelines. Now, use organic structure when the tasks have high visibility and low analyzability. For example, let's talk about a research setting. You've got unique situations with little opportunity for repetition. Use mechanism structures when the tasks have high variability and high analyzability. Think about assembly work. The tasks are routine, and you got high predictability and well-established procedures. Let's focus a little now on organizational structure. Structure follows strategy. It represents the decision and actions applied to achieve the organization's goals. Structure follows strategy. Structure points to the environment in which the organization will operate. Leadership decisions, which structure to apply, becomes something you must consider. It results from you having to make a conscious human decision regarding what structure you're going to apply. You have an innovative structure, providing unique products and attracting clients who want customization. You can have cost leadership structure, whereby you maximize products to achieve the competitive pricing. Then there's the notion of the project-based matrix structure. Here, most employees assigned permanently to a functional unit, engineering, design, marketing, but located temporarily in a specific project unit like game 1, game 2, or game 3. In this example, similar to the one in BioWare's matrix structure, they are organized around functions: art, audio, programming, and team-based game development projects. Employees are assigned to a cross-functional team responsible for a specific game project, yet also belong to a permanent function unit to which they are assigned. Thank you so much.